Hey guys. Hey, we have a really interesting new sub. She is a Darlie Routier supporter, and she has been close to the case for many, many years. And she thinks that Darlie is innocent. And I think that Darlie is guilty. So I think if we can have a discussion without like being angry and stuff, because right away the first sentence had the word shitty in it, and I'm like, oh, geez, here we go. But if we can have a discussion, I think it, could be very interesting for all of us, right? In fact, if I can get that buffering thing figured out, then I'm going to try to get the live chats going again. We want to start with the Manson one because we have a couple of subs who are really smart about the Manson case. But then we could, hopefully, if this gal's willing, then maybe we could do a live chat where she and I, are both available to discuss the case. That'd be really cool. So she posted a comment and I started to do my long reply and I posted it. And then when I looked at it, I saw that I misspelled a word and whatever. So then I tried to take it off and copy it and then put it back on and correct it. But when I went to put it back on, it wouldn't go back on. Ugh, computers. So I thought I'll just make a video. It's easier that way. So here's the reply. I said, well, as you can see, I'm pretty busy with this little hobby of mine discussing true crime cases. And since I try to spend less than 1 or 2 hours a day, like that's the max too, by the way. And yet with all these comments and all the crap that's been going on, it's like, oh, sometimes it's more than that. Not my first choice, that's for sure. Anyway, whine, whine, whine. So in my response, I said that I'm, staying pretty busy just keeping up with the questions and comments. So maybe that's why you and I haven't discussed this case yet. And then I said, I'll respond to your comment line by line. She said in her comment, I think it is really shitty for you to make a video like this claiming she is guilty when you have not even bothered to prove one shred of what you are saying. You say there is way too much evidence against her. So why not take the time to prove that that so-called evidence? And I said the jury did take the time to examine the evidence and they voted guilty of capital murder. I've spent 5 or 6 years examining the evidence and I believe the jurors got it right. She said the jury didn't even get to see any of the evidence against Darren. That's Darlie Routier's husband. She said he was never investigated and her lawyer was hired for one reason, to protect Darren and not implicate him in that crime. I said, I disagree. Darlie was loudly and clearly saying that the phantom intruder was not Darren. So what did you expect her high-priced, highly skilled, experienced legal team to do? Tell the jurors to just not listen to their client, who, against their advice, took the stand and made a fool of herself? Darren was never investigated? I disagree with that statement too. In fact, during the parallel investigation, they followed the leads of the intruder theory and the possibility that it was someone from inside the house who murdered those children, and they started with investigating Darren. Darren's story was consistent, and his story fit the physical evidence. Darlie's story was not consistent, and her story did not fit the physical evidence. Wasn't it her bloody footprints on the floor underneath the broken glass? But wait, didn't she say she heard the glass break before she ran through the kitchen? And wait, didn't the forensic testing show that she didn't really run after all? What about the sink? What about the cleanup? What about the blood? It wasn't Darren's blood there, now was it? And the superficial self-inflicted wounds? How about the mother who claimed that she was such a light sleeper that the baby turning over in his crib would wake her up in the middle of the night? But she slept through 2 of her children being murdered who were laying just a couple of feet away from her? You said her lawyer was hired to protect Darren and not implicate him? I disagree. Her team of high-priced, highly qualified, highly skilled, experienced defense lawyers, the best in the state of Texas at the time, were hired to defend Darlie, and they did the best they could. Again, when they have a client insisting that her husband was not the phantom attacker, then she takes the stand against their advice. They have no choice but to do as she tells them to do when she insists that her husband is innocent. The commenter continues, "You will find no evidence anywhere to prove that Darren Routier was ever investigated." And I replied, it was 1996. Police agencies didn't release all of the inner workings of their investigations like they seem to nowadays. Let me see. Okay, she said he was in that home and claimed to have slept through the attack of 3 family members. And I replied, Darren was sleeping in the 2nd floor master bedroom, where the baby was also sleeping in his crib. Darlie, however, was sleeping on the main floor within 2 feet of the older 2 children who were sleeping in front of the still playing television set. Maybe if Darlie had bothered to scream for her gun-toting husband when she claims she opened her eyes and saw a man standing at her feet, walking away from her, then Darren would have rushed down the stairs and caught the guy. Oh wait, Darlie didn't scream. She walked behind the phantom intruder while he walked toward the garage. And then, when the phantom intruder, who had evidently levitated into the house, when he decided to leave, he just figured he would be extra nice, I guess, and leave the murder weapon behind, without knowing at the time whether or not the handle of the knife was one which would be difficult to get fingerprints off of. So he dropped it on the floor, and he kept on walking toward the garage. And then Darlie picked it up, and then she set it on the counter, and then she looked over at the boys, and then she finally screamed. The commenter says, that dog would have been screaming. Even though he locked that dog up, it would have been screaming during that entire attack. And I replied, well, I think Darlie said it best when she said that the dog started barking when other people entered the home. The commenter said, and for your information, Darlie did not say she slept through the attack. And I said, well, that depends on which story you're buying. One of her stories, the one she wrote in her own handwriting after being Mirandized just 2 days after the murders, was that she opened her eyes, she saw a man standing at her feet, walking away from her, so she walked behind him, and like I just said, he decided evidently to leave the murder weapon behind. He dropped it on the floor, she picked it up, she set it on the counter, she looked over at the boys, and then she screamed. The commenter said, Darlie made it clear right from the get-go. She heard her kids crying. She thought she felt a struggle but didn't know if she was awake or dreaming. And I said, wow, I don't remember seeing any of those words at all in her written statement to the police. The commenter said Darlie had no memory of that 911 call. And I said, I did notice that when she testified, she did seem to have a lot of problems getting her memory stories straight. And I think the jurors noticed that too. The commenter said, the only things she appeared to remember was things Darren coached to her. And to that I just replied with question marks because that just makes no sense to me. The commenter said, maybe you should look into the case before you start accusing anyone of murder. And I replied, I've looked into the case for 5 years straight. I have a Facebook group with over 1,000 members, and we have been discussing the case for years. And I have thousands of pages of resources for the members of the group to study too. Accuse anyone of murder? You do realize she was convicted of capital murder, right? I'm not accusing her of murder. I'm saying that I agree with her conviction of murder. The commenter says, the jury never knew about Darren, so this was not a fair trial for Darlie. And I said, they knew whatever it was that Darlie wanted them to know. And they got to see Darren on the stand too. So I'm pretty sure the jurors got to learn all about Darren.